Testing, testing. Welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to this Cabinet meeting on the 28th of July 2022. Fire alarm procedures. If the fire alarm is activated, vacate the offices via the stairs. Please do not use the lifts. Assemble in Hawley Square on the green, and officers will assist you and advise when it is deemed safe to return to the chamber. Next, I'd advise everyone to please switch off or turn on to silent your mobile phones, and do not make or receive calls whilst this meeting is in progress. Please note this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. The meeting will also be recorded and will be subsequently broadcast on the internet. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? No? There's loads of baying hands that definitely want to film the meeting, but no. Where do I go to? Aha, okay. Would members please note that the wording to recommendation 2 in the report for agenda item 4, Ramsgate Future Levelling Up Fund Projects, third-party grants, has been changed to reflect new job titles. It's been changed to the grant agreement is signed under deed by the interim head of legal and monitoring officer, and not Director of Law and Democracy, an acting deputy chief exec and section 151 officer, instead of the Director of Finance, and is witnessed by a member of the Council. The following members have asked to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1. I've got Councillor Everett for item number 4. Do I have any other councillors that wish to speak?
Please, Chair, I'd like to speak on item 5, please, Chair.
Brilliant. Thank you, Councillor Orban. If I do end up forgetting about you, just start waving madly like you normally do.
I'll never let you forget.
I know you won't. I know you won't. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Apologies. Are there any apologies for absence? The Leader of the Council, supposedly, has sent her apologies to this meeting. Declarations of interest. Does anyone have any interest to declare in the items of business on the agenda this evening? No? Brilliant. Agenda item 3, to approve the summary of recommendations and decisions of the Cabinet meeting held on the 16th of June 2022. A copy is attached to the agenda pack. I propose that we approve the minutes. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bob Bayford. Do members agree? Brilliant. Thank you very much. Agenda item 4 is the Ramsgate Future Levelling Up Fund Project third-party grants, which is to introduce me, and then I'll come to Councillor Everett to speak. So, members and councillors, good evening. Part of the Ramsgate Levelling Up Fund programme includes the establishment of a physical and digital presence in deprived neighbourhoods and to support outreach and training. In Newington, this will provide a commercial training kitchen facility supporting initial skills development and community enterprise in food. Members have been asked to approve the recommendation in this report to provide a grant of up to £500,000 to Newington Community Association for the delivery of this project. The grant will be used to extend the building to allow the creation of a kitchen training facility and make enhancements to the building to create a space where local residents can enter to discuss barriers to employment and consider new training and employment opportunities. This is great news, as we are now starting to see the next steps of these projects being delivered. The recommendations are: 1, to approve the use of grants which exceed £250,000 to third parties to deliver the agreed Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities funded project, up to £500,000 to Newington Community Association to deliver the Access to Opportunities project in Newington Community Centre. And recommendation number 2 is the grant agreement is signed under deed by the Director of Law and Democracy and the Director of Finance and Section 151 officer, and is witnessed by a member of the Council. To speak under 20.1, I have Councillor Everett.
Thank you, Councillor Pugh. I thought I'd tell you about my lunch yesterday. Unusual thing to bring to a council meeting, but I had lunch yesterday at the Newington Community Centre, conveniently enough, and that lunch was prepared by people who come through East Kent College, who were overseen by Mike Spackman, who's the chef who trains people in use of the kitchen at Newington. And there were about 2 or 3 dozen guests, and it was a very good lunch, and obviously those people are benefiting from hands-on experience. and pretty typical of the sort of thing that goes on at the Newington Community Centre. And relevant to this, obviously, because what's being proposed here is a massive expansion of a project which, to some extent, is already in place. And I think that's fantastic news for Newington. It's a good initiative because, apart from anything else, it's a quick win for the levelling up bid. When we started to put some flesh on the bones of the levelling up bid for Ramsgate, I was particularly keen that there was something for Newington, not just because I happen to be a Newington councillor, but also because I think it's important that the people of Ramsgate see that this money is for the benefit of the whole community. And we know that in terms of isolation and in terms of social exclusion, Newington is probably the ward in Ramsgate which is most on the periphery and where people feel most left out of what's going on in the town centre. It's obviously the case that most of the levelling up money is going to be spent in the Port and Harbour area, which I think is right economically. That doesn't mean it doesn't benefit the whole town. Obviously it does. But I think the physical presence of something happening in Newington, being delivered in Newington, building on excellent work that's already taking place in Newington, and no doubt producing more good food, like my lunch yesterday, is just all good news. So I want to welcome this, and I'm delighted to see it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Evatt. I agree with everything you said, rather surprisingly or unsurprisingly. Thank you very much. Therefore, I move the motion. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Cupp. Do members agree? Agreed. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 5, the Ramsgate Levelling Up Fund Heritage Lottery Fund application. To introduce myself, and then I will come to Councillor Alban for his much long-awaited questions. I'm just going to find my section, apologies. There we are. Part of the Ramsgate Levelling Up Fund programme includes investment in the Grade 2 listed Clock House, refurbishing it as a cultural heritage exhibition space and public cafe. The Clock House will provide an important publicly accessible focal point for visitors and residents at the heart of the Royal Harbour, with a new seafront cafe and a space for history and heritage to be exhibited. Officers have been working with the Ramsgate Society and Historic England to develop a plan for the building, and for engagement with the Heritage Lottery, National Lottery Heritage Fund, a proposal has been put together for a funding application to the National Lottery. Cabinet are asked to approve the submission of a development phase application to National Lottery Heritage Fund, which forms part of the match funding for the Levelling Up Fund project. Therefore, the recommendations are: recommendation number 1 is to approve the submission of an application for a development phase grant of £322,740 to the National Lottery Heritage Fund. And recommendation number 2 is that the Director of Regeneration is authorised to agree the final submission documents based on approval from the Section 151 officer. Therefore, I present this to Cabinet. To speak under Section 20.1, I have Councillor Alban.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst not wishing to make this a love fest, I welcome this as well. You know, and anything that we can get in Ramsgate to certainly look after our heritage is more than welcome, and I support the recommendations. Just a couple of questions. Within the report, it states relating to the construction costs that there will obviously be, with the current situation, construction costs arising on a regular basis because of materials, etc. Have you got a rough idea of what those costs may be in percentage terms, just so I'll be able to get that? I'm looking at Louise, if she may be able to answer that for you. That's one. Oh, you want all? Okay, yeah, okay. Could you advise us how much of the Levelling Up Fund has been allocated to the Clock House? Or is there no funding allocated to the Clock House? Only that. Yeah, so that's the third one. And lastly, but probably frivolously, I I did find it that what we're applying for 322,000 plus, and a match funding of 35,000, and it just seems an odd phrase to have that you've got 322,000 and match. My view of match funding was like for like, but I'm being pedantic here, but 35,000 doesn't match up to 322,000. I just wanted an explanation. I said it's slightly frivolous, but I know what you mean, but it just doesn't read right. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Orban. I don't think anyone has ever said that you're frivolous. I certainly haven't, not in a public meeting. But thank you, Councillor Orban. No, quite, that as well, Councillor Bayford, but that won't be recorded in the minutes. I agree with a lot of what you've said, Councillor Orban. This is an incredibly important part of the Levelling Up Fund. I know that I've been communicating with other councillors as well from Ramsgate that also have a keen interest in the artefacts that are held within the Clock House and there at the Maritime Museum and everything. So, you know, it's a keen interest that I've taken in ensuring that we get this right and that we crack on with this as soon as possible, so that we can get it sorted, really. You'll be surprised to know that I don't have many of the answers to your questions, so I am going to turn to Louise, who I'm sure can elaborate on all of them. So, Louise, ask you.
Thank you. So it's got 1.48 million allocated to the Clock House. The report is about the development phase. So National Lottery Heritage Fund is in two phases. So you put a development grant application in. That gives you a period of time to develop up the project using that funding. And our expectation is that we will be submitting a bigger bid for capital and revenue costs in the region of 2 million. But obviously we need to do that piece of work first. I'm not going to necessarily give you a percentage for the construction costs. We are phasing it. So phase one is levelling up, and that's about making the building good and secure and dealing with some of the challenges the building has and doing some of the works within that building. And then the lottery bid is about the extension and building capacity for that building. We have some very initial plans, and the Ramsgate Society did a piece of work 5 years ago, using some, and they had some costed up plans. We've worked from those, but as you said, the marketplace is changing, and what I don't want to do is predetermine what of that will be construction. But what will be in the lottery bid, because the National Lottery is not about buildings per se, it's about access to them. So it will be broader than construction works to the building. It'll be about how people in Ramsgate, East Kent and visitors can engage with the history and heritage of Ramsgate.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Louise. I think I'd also as well add, Councillor Orban, before we move on, that I've been invited to meet with members of the Ramsgate Society, so I'll be taking them up on that offer as well, specifically to talk about levelling up and wider things like that. Councillor Bayford, you look like you wanted to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, I think it's very disappointing the state that the Clock House is in. Bit of history, I believe in about 2011, a lease was granted to the current leaseholders. That lease, again, I believe, had a lot of obligations on the leaseholder in return for rent-free periods, and it seems to me in the ensuing 11 years that virtually nothing has been done. So I think it's two things really. I'd like an assurance that the current leaseholders will gain in no way from this, that we're not going to do a local authority thing, we give them compensation for doing nothing and whatever. So that's number one. And number two, that if they've got obligations under the lease that they haven't fulfilled, they're enforceable, that we actually enforce or seek compensation from them, because I think it's disgraceful the way they treated the building, personally.
Thank you, Councillor Bayford. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think that's really important. I can go to Louise. If can you clarify that, Louise, or do you want me to waffle on? I mean, I think it's more that I didn't want to put you on the spot, Louise. I think that it's more, but I have done that. Apologies. I think it's more the point. Yeah, it's fine. I will in a minute. But I think it's more important, Councillor Bayford, that actually you're right. They had certain obligations, and I think it's important that they fulfil them. And at the same time, we don't compensate them for handing over a lease to a building that they've done nothing with, and as they've been of no benefit to the town. But I'll refer to Louise because she may have something to add.
Yeah, thanks. So our legal team are in contact with the legal team of the current leaseholders. So that's kind of in process. I don't think there's any compensation being discussed in terms of ending of that lease. I haven't got the specifics necessarily about that, but we can cover that.
Sorry, Chair, just briefly. I mean, one of the concerns is that I believe it's a 25-year lease that was granted to them. So, you know, again, just wonder whether that potentially sort of gives it some value that they might be trying to get out of us. And I just think we've got to make sure we don't.
Yeah, well, I mean, Councillor Playford, that's a very good point to raise. I mean, that's something that we'll look into and will ensure that actually not only do they relinquish the lease, but they don't benefit financially from having to surrender that early. I think that's quite important to see. But we'll certainly take that away. Therefore, I move these recommendations. Do I have a seconder? Councillor David Saunders. Sorry, do members agree? Agreed? Brilliant. Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 6, tenant and leaseholder services, KPI Q4 housing performance report. To introduce Councillor Jill Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. This report covers our progress on tenant and leaseholder health and safety compliance and provides an update on the overall performance of the tenant and leaseholder service. During Q4, TDC came off regulatory notice, which was placed on the Council in 2019. This reflects the considerable improvements that have been made for landlord compliance. In December 2022, the team put in place an action plan that would ensure they were at an acceptable level by March 2022. They were successful in achieving what they set out to do. This included increasing domestic electrical compliance figures from 74% to 90% and reducing our fire risk assessment actions from 488 to 219. The team's operational performance continues to show improvements, although there are still some areas that require attention to achieve the set targets. Their void turnaround time has improved due to recent measures put in place, but there is still some way to go to achieve set targets, and the team continues to work with MERS and on internal processes to achieve this. The final arrears figures for 2021-22 are the lowest since transition and reflect the positive changes made. The team are disappointed that it did not achieve their target of reducing arrears by 1%, but this year has presented a particularly difficult operating environment, and where other housing providers may be experiencing an increase in arrears, the team continue to reduce the level of debt. It's pleasing to see that the performance of our capital programme has improved significantly in comparison to last year. But this year has presented, the team has spent 78% of the allocated budget compared to 37% in the previous year, ensuring we protect council's property assets from dilapidation and provide decent homes for our residents. The most significant success from last year's programme are completion of all cyclical programmes, for example, kitchen and bathroom replacements and window replacements, the refurbishment of 7 passenger lifts, and the external decorations that have been carried out on the Newington estate. Excuse me. Come on.
The technology's beaten you.
Right, there are 2 planned works projects that are delayed. One of them is the major structural works at Royal Crescent in Ramsgate, and the other is major works and improvements at Churchfields in Margate. The procurement of the contract has delayed the progress of the project at Royal Crescent. The project is very complex, but with input required from multiple stakeholders. So every time we are close to another issue crops up, be it legal or insurance or to do with the specifications, and this stops us progressing until we've resolved it. At Churchfields, when attempting to progress this project, we've found that plans developed by East Kent Housing are not fit for purpose. Waste and recycling were not engaged when these designs were agreed, and the proposed location of the bin stores would make collections impossible. We went back to the designers with the Waste and Recycling Department to rethink this element. I recommend that Cabinet note the report.
Thank you, Councillor Bayford. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bob Bayford. Do members agree?
Great.
Thank you very much. That now concludes